Jesus, provides the abundant life. We talk about these things. But I think sometimes what we miss is I think what we think is it's like, well, Jesus is going to give us he's going to give us this everlasting life. He's going to give us this abundant life, as if somehow he's just going to provide it to us. As if like you go and you just pick abundant life off the shelf and just make it happen, instead of it being something that is developed within us. We don't just one day pass into it. Abundant life is something that's working towards us in a process. And we see here, this example in Genesis 2, which I think is a dynamic example of how God uses hunger to bring us into fulfillment in areas. If you look, let me see. Look here, Genesis 2, let's look here in verse 18. And the Lord said, "It is not good that man should be alone. I will make him a help meet for him." And out of the ground the Lord God formed every beast of the field and every fowl of the air, and brought them unto Adam to see what he would call them. And whatsoever Adam called every living creature, that was the name thereof. And Adam gave the names to all the cattle and the fowl of the air and to the beasts of the field, but for Adam there was not found a help meet for him. Now that becomes important because that tells you why he was naming the creatures. He wasn't under necessarily some scientific expedition to try to categorize all living organisms. His whole purpose was, God was bringing him all these different creatures for the sole purpose of finding a help, or finding a companion, or finding a person he could connect with. In verse 21, and the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam, and he slept, and he took one of his ribs, and he closed up the flesh instead thereof. And the rib which the Lord God had taken from man, he made a woman, and brought her unto man. And Adam said, "Now is this bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man. Therefore shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh." Now I think it's interesting. The reason, in verse 24, it says, Therefore shall a man leave his father and mother. The therefore does not actually connect really necessarily back to verse 23, because now she's bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh, therefore I'm going to leave. If you think about it, it doesn't even necessarily make proper context, because he says, verse 23, okay, God just provided me this woman who is made out of my bones and made out of my own flesh, and I'm going to call her my wife. And he says, therefore shall a man leave his mother and father. Well, Adam didn't have a mother and father to cleave to. So verse 24 here, the therefore, actually connects all the way back up to verse 18. God said, "It is not good that a man should be alone. I'll make a help suitable or suited for him." Verse 24, therefore shall a man leave his father and mother. That's where the connection verse is. But verses 19 through 23 give us a picture of what God did to kind of foster this hunger in Adam. And I even have to think here in verse 18, when God says it's not good that man's alone, I have to think at this stage right here, man wasn't even aware of what his problem was. I think God looked back and could diagnose it, but I think Adam at this point knew something was not quite right. He knew something wasn't working the way it probably should, but he couldn't understand what it was. God understood what the issue was. And what God had to do was, he worked a process in Adam's life where Adam then began seeking a course of fulfillment that continually led to disappointment and frustration, only so God could set him up so when he finally received what God had for him, he was able to receive it and latch on to it. So we see here, God uses a process of saying, there's something that you need that you may not even understand what it is, but I'm going to begin working in you a desire for it, just so you will receive it properly when it comes to you. When I deliver it to you, you have to know how to be able to take it and receive it. So we see that God uses this form of hunger. He will build this up in us. Another example we see, if you look into the New Testament, the book of Galatians, Paul refers to the law. He says that God gave us the law for the express purpose of being our school teacher, for the express purpose of keeping us safe and walking us along so we could kind of have a somewhat relationship with God. But what the law actually did was, it allowed us to come so far towards God, but not be able to go the last yard, the last distance. And so there was always a growing boundary between us and God. And that had to be in place so that when Jesus came and removed it, now we could have the interaction we've so long desired. There's a desire, we wanted to be with God, we want to see God. Now it's able to become fulfilled through Jesus Christ. So God uses these things. And I think what we do is, I think if we're not careful, we'll too often, we may even turn it internally and say, there's something wrong with me because I feel this way. And being hungry doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. Being hungry means there's something on the inside of you that's lacking fulfillment, And we have to say, how do I properly go to God to see this thing become fulfilled? How do I get to God in place and walk in this satisfaction? We also talked last week, we really wanted to talk about, keyed in on 3 hindrances to hunger. We really talked about understanding why hunger doesn't have its proper course in us. And the first thing we talked about last week was a spoiled appetite. We talked about, if you have your Bibles, let's turn here again. We'll look here again to Proverbs 27. Proverbs 27. But I think sometimes it's what we too often do is we will supplement our regular diet with so much fluff and so much, trying to find the nice way to put it, mess, junk. we supplement our diet so much with those things so that we actually lose the hunger or lose the desire to eat things that are properly suited for us. So we lose the desire for proper nutrition just because we've so filled ourselves with things that don't really satisfy or don't really provide us the things we need. Proverbs 27:7, I love this verse. It says, "The full soul loathes a honeycomb, but to the hungry soul every bitter thing is sweet." Hunger can't have its proper work in us. Imagine this. It's the full soul loathes the honeycomb. And for us, maybe it's, the full soul loathes the Krispy Kreme. It's like you show up on a Sunday morning, Krispy Kreme donuts are hot and ready to go. But it's like if I went to, breakfast buffet beforehand, I loaded up on biscuits and gravy, the idea of eating one more thing, or like I said, you've already had your dozen Krispy Kreme donuts, so the idea of eating one more dozen just sounds disgusting. That we have to understand that there's a possibility we can walk into so many things that actually keep us from having the right desires we want. And I think it's so easy to do this in a Christian context, and when it comes to Christianity, because we've built so many things culturally through television and through radio and through books. There's a lot of things we can surround ourselves with that we can just live mired in a puddle of Christian stuff and think that through being in that environment, it actually translates to us being fulfilled or translates to us having a relationship with God. And I think what happens is you can spend 24 hours a day watching Christian television, listening to Christian radio, reading Christian books, and still not know God, and still be empty, and still not have a personal connection to who God really is. And so I think what you have to do is say, sometimes it's almost better to say, let's take away some of the things. You know what, maybe I don't have to keep myself mired in this, so that when I come into the Word, I'm really hungry for the Word. And I'm not hungry for something like the Word. And we have to kind of be careful, I think, of being caught up in being fulfilled in a lot of the cultural Christian stuff, but missing out on the essential Christian stuff. It's easy to come into a place and find, I want the choir, and I want the show, and I want this. Well, those are fine and those are good, but that's not the same thing as really having a relationship with God. And so, you can get all hyped up on the music, and you get all excited about the preaching, and you get all those things, and still walk away empty if you don't have that first baseline with God. The other thing we really looked at is we looked at, in 2 Corinthians 13, Paul challenges the church to say, in verses 5 through 9, we're not going to go there for the sake of time, but he says, do you have to even figure out if you even believe? Are you even Christians? Do you even really believe in God? Or is this just something you've adopted? Have you become so accustomed to being a part of it that it's not even personal to you anymore? And he says, test yourself, check and see. And so we started talking. We said we have to check ourselves to say, is my relationship I have with God, first of all, is it existent? Is it real? And if it is it growing? Is it vibrant? And is it focused solely on what Jesus did? Because if I have a relationship with God that's based on how well I perform, how good I am, what I've done, what I've paid, what I've had, how I've attended, if I could point to anything and say, that's what shows me I have my good relationship with God, that's right. And if it's anything other than, no, I come to God because I know He loves me and He's crazy about me, and Jesus died and made the way for me, I've got to build my relationship solely on that fact.